2012 Chevy Silverado 1500. I've been told it's a tow-in no start, and I've also been told that it will try to start if you give it throttle. Yep, I gave it some gas pedal and it started, and it stays running. What happens if I put it in gear? And it'll take a load too. So I don't see a check engine light. I wonder if this is a case of sticky electronic throttle with a lot of goo on it. Give it a little throttle, starts right up. Okay, well, I'll get this pulled into the shop so I can check codes and check all that good stuff. Well, it did start and run, and it ran just fine on the way into the shop. Yeah, it'll start every time if I give it a little gas. And then it'll idle, and it'll stay idling. So it looks like we've got a hard start rather than a no start. And I didn't give it any throttle that time. I was about to. Okay, let me check codes. I kind of suspect with the symptoms that we're going to find a stuck open purge valve. One of the clues is that the fuel tank is almost full. So if you've got a leaky purge valve, you'll have a hard starting, especially after you add a lot of fuel. Or we could have a sticky throttle body. So we'll see what we see. Yes, it is a K. It's a four-wheel drive. This was a VIN 7. No. Okay, so I'll do the master code scan and see what that brings up. Let that do its thing, and then we'll see what we got for codes. Okay, let's see. We've got an HVAC code. That one doesn't matter. That one doesn't matter. Fuel trim rich, bank 2, rich, bank 1, and the P0101 mass airflow sensor performance. So we could have a mass airflow sensor problem. We could have that purge valve leaking. We could have, what else? Sticky throttle body. Go back and look at some engine data now. Data display. Let's look at tach data, throttle actuator control data. Desired angle is 19, indicated angle is 24%. That kind of suggests it may be a little gummed up and dirty. Next thing I'm going to look at is mass airflow sensor, fuel trim. See where our long-term trim is sitting. So -16, that tells us that the computer over a fair amount of time has seen that it needs to take away 16% fuel. So that could suggest a problem. Let's see if we've got mass airflow sensor data in this list. Okay, mass airflow sensor, the engine's off. It's reading 0, that's a good sign. Calculated airflow, I wouldn't really worry about that at the moment. Change my units. Temperature seems to be accurate. MAP sensor, key on, engine off, appears to be accurate. Notice how it matches baro. I don't think this vehicle actually does have a baro sensor. It may use the MAP. But still, where I'm at, 100 kilopascals is normal. for the map sensor key on, engine off. Okay, so my next thing that I want to check is do an EVAP purge seal test to quickly rule out that purge valve or not. Where is it? EVAP. Purge seal. I'm gonna have to start it up. Maybe before I start it, I'll check what our fuel tank pressure sensor is doing. Should be reading 0 and about 1.5 volts right now because the EVAP vent is open. See how it says open, venting? So we should have no pressure and no vacuum on our EVAP system. And let me go back down to our pressure sensor and let me start that up. And then I'll click System Seal. So now I've commanded the vent to close and the purge off. That fuel tank pressure should stay close to 0. And it's not immediately dropping into a vacuum, so that suggests the purge valve is not leaking. I'll command it to 10% purge. We are building a vacuum, so this proves that the vent solenoid is working. It's opening and closing, or at least it's closing. We haven't proven that it opens yet, but it looks like the purge valve is working, the pressure sensor is working, and the vent. So now I'll click System Seal. That vacuum should hold or at least stay somewhat close to that value, and it looks like it is. 4.29 inches of water is very, very little pressure. I think that's less than 1/2 of a PSI. But still, it is holding it. And then when I go to exit, it should vent. We vented, and that pressure went away. So that proves all in one test, the pressure sensor's working, the vent valve is working, and the purge valve's working. Not only that, but it's not leaking because I can seal it off, and we are not dropping into a vacuum on the EVAP system. So that proves our problem is not on the purge valve. And because we have that mass airflow sensor code, I would be very suspicious of the mass airflow sensor. And what I'll probably do is visually inspect the mass airflow sensor and also visually inspect the throttle body. Let me actually go and see what our mass airflow sensor is doing right now and see what the fuel trims are doing. Whoa, minus 30. That's a problem. Let's see. Calculated and actual look like they're pretty close, so that's good. That kind of indicates the mass airflow sensor is reading somewhat accurately. But we should definitely not have negative 30% fuel trims. And so short term is an adjustment based off of long term. So we're starting at negative 30%, and then short term is adjusting from there. So it looks like we are hovering pretty close to negative 30% total trim. That is abnormal. We'll have to find out why. That would also cause our rich codes on both banks because we are beyond either negative 25% or plus 25%. That's what will cause a rich or lean code, is if you're beyond that threshold. Okay, so our possibilities at this point, we're taking away fuel. So that means that either what the mass airflow sensor has reported, as in how much air did it breathe, we may have over measured how much air we're breathing, and then the oxygen sensors are picking that up as too much fuel because the calculation was off. We added too much fuel, so therefore we're taking the fuel back away. So either this is something, a sensor's lying, the oxygen sensors are lying, which I really doubt. I really doubt both oxygen sensors on both sides are equally lying. That's really unlikely. So this is most likely going to be something that affects both banks at the same time, and that would most likely be a mass airflow sensor, or somehow we are getting a mass amount of extra fuel to both banks. And that's also not very likely, because I just checked for that purge valve to be leaking, and that would probably be the number one suspect to cause that. So I'm kind of suspecting a mass airflow sensor fault at this point, or some sort of air leak under the hood. There's a couple quick and dirty tests we can do here. Let me bring up my data again. First off, I can disconnect that mass airflow sensor and just see what happens to the fuel trims. So it doesn't look like they changed much at all. If anything, it got more. It's taking more fuel away. If you suspected the mass airflow sensor was lying and you disconnected it and the fuel trims immediately counter, so it would have gone positive 30 and zeroed out, then that almost confirms your mass airflow sensor is reading it inaccurately, or you have some sort of air leak. But what I'm seeing here is that we still have a rich condition of too much fuel getting in, and we need to continue our test. So I'm actually going to plug that back in, and then I'm going to shut the key off, clear codes, and enter a new key cycle before I do this next test. Okay, we're in a new key cycle. Let me just get this out of here so I can have some better access. Check for any air leaks or anything like that. Anything loose. This right here is pretty common for being loose. Looks like it is installed. Okay, next step, I'm gonna bring up my fuel trim data again, and I'm gonna spray some brake cleaner around this intake manifold while it's running, and I'm gonna look for a fuel trim reaction. Okay, so we're at a total trim over negative 40%. And what I'm gonna do here is select items. And the Tech 2 kind of sucks for this. So I'll do short-term trim on both banks, hit accept. So I could use a different scan tool that has better graphing capabilities for this, but I think this should work. The Tech 2 should be just fine to do it this way. Okay, so I've got the fuel trim on a graph. I'm gonna spray auxiliary fuel around the intake manifold. I'm going to check for any sort of reaction. God, this thing does not want to pick up the screen on this thing. I'm not seeing anything. So if we had a vacuum or air leak, you would see the fuel trims immediately correct. They'd probably go way negative, or maybe it's so far negative that it can't go any further. Let me try. I don't know why this is not picking the screen up. It's just this piece of garbage Tech 2 that the longer I have it turned on, the screen starts to go dark. So I think we want to do fuel trim reset. So this is going to blank out the long-term trim. Reset. See how that went to 0? And now our short-term trim is still taking away fuel, and the long-term trim is immediately learning that. So we've definitely got something going on here. It could even be poor quality fuel causing this, or an incorrect alcohol sample, which would be another good thing to check. Wow, this thing is really not picking up the screen. So let me... Anything? No, I think we're right back where we were. Okay, yeah, look at this. What did I just say? Fuel quality or an alcohol sample that is way off. So does the fuel actually have 70%, 77% alcohol content, or is that an erratic reading? Because on this vehicle, I believe it does not have an alcohol sensor. It uses the mass airflow sensor to calculate. So I wonder what's going on here. Watch. I'm gonna come in here and do a fuel alcohol composition reset. Fuel composition reset, and then I bet the fuel trim is gonna go back to normal. Reset. Now we'll exit. Go to a fuel trim reset again. Oh, that does not want to focus. Okay, reset. Are we still showing a problem? I wonder if this fuel actually has 77% alcohol. No, that wouldn't make sense, because alcohol, you would need a higher fuel trim. You would need more fuel to make up the same amount of energy. Actually, it is a lot better. It's no longer minus 30. It's minus 10 and minus 20. So that may actually be what it was all along, an incorrect fuel sample. Does this have, let me see. Does this have, oh, okay, so I can take a fuel sample right here, and I can actually test and measure how much fuel or alcohol content's in the fuel. Also, that's what the throttle body looks like. Not too bad, but it would be worth cleaning, that's for sure. Could use a cleaning. This is after a quick cleaning. I don't really think anymore that that's what was the cause of the problem, but I'm already in here, and why not clean it? Okay, I put the engine cover back on. I'm gonna skip taking the fuel sample for now because I honestly don't feel that I need to. Like I said, if the fuel was truly full of alcohol, our fuel trims would be higher and not lower, because alcohol needs more fuel to make the same amount of energy. So now that I've reset the fuel composition, it starts right up. So what I think is going on here is that the fuel composition was incorrectly learned as having 77% fuel or fuel alcohol content. We know that whenever there's fuel or ethanol or alcohol or ethanol in the fuel, we need more fuel. So the computer thought we needed more fuel. The oxygen sensors picked that up. They picked it up as an excessively rich condition, and then the fuel trims counteracted by going way negative. So our math equation right up front was wrong, and I think that's what's going on here. Now the real question is, why would the fuel composition be incorrect? Because on this vehicle, like I said, there is no fuel composition sensor like there was on previous models. So that means that this is a calculated value. And if I remember correctly, it is calculated off of mass airflow, fuel trims, oxygen sensors, whatever. We had a mass airflow sensor code. So I really don't know if somebody else has been messing with this beforehand, but it looks like I don't have any air leaks or anything like that. And the mass airflow sensor is reading accurate at idle at least. So my next step here would be to remove and visually inspect the mass airflow sensor and the air filter, because I'm almost suspecting that I might find something there. Okay, so the air filter does not look too concerning. Mostly we want to see if there's anything on the clean side of the filter. It is kind of dusty and dirty. Check inside the duct. doesn't look too bad there. And then we'll check the sensor itself. So, I don't know if you could see this on the camera, but it does appear that there's some sort of dusty film. And a little bit of dust and fuzz. Can I zoom in on it?
It is GP.
As you can see, it could be cleaner, it could be better. Clean that mass airflow sensor up, and then I will reinstall it and I'll go for a drive while I monitor the fuel trims, and I'll see just what happens. And like I said, I really don't know why the fuel alcohol content may have learned that, and I really do not suspect that there's excess alcohol in the fuel. Yeah, that sure looks a lot better. Another part of the mystery is that there's one of these screws missing, and I wonder if that could be a contributing factor, that maybe it's just pulling in dirty air and getting that sensor dirty, and that's how we ended up this way. Okay, so I took a look at service information and I verified that yes, the fuel alcohol content is a calculated value. It's calculated after a refuel, and what the computer does is it opens up the purge valve for a short amount of time, etc., and it makes a determination of what kind of fuel you put in it, either E85 or not, and so it's a calculated value. And the fact that it's off, or I suspect it's off, is very suspicious. So it makes me think that somebody has worked on this before. We had the P0101 code, yet the mass airflow sensor was more or less working okay. So it makes me think that in the past this vehicle has had somebody work on it and they left a duct loose or something loose under the hood, and that could have thrown off the mass airflow sensor, could have thrown off the calculation for the alcohol content. I've seen it. I've seen this how happen. I've seen it where I get the truck after the vehicle, after everyone else has looked at it, after everyone else has cleared their codes and done their little resets, and then I'm the one left with all the question marks. So what am I going to do from here? I reset the fuel composition. I'm going to go drive it while I monitor my fuel trim data, because my fuel trim should be close to 0%, plus or minus 10% either direction, whether that's at idle, cruising, or loading it up pretty hard and accelerating fairly hard, just as long as we're still in closed loop. So long as we're in closed loop, my fuel trim should be plus or minus 10% either direction, either rich or lean, and that will tell me whether I have a problem still or not. So that's what I'm going to do. I almost suspect that I may have fixed this vehicle just by doing the fuel composition reset, but it bothers me. And how did we get there? Why was it that way? And before I've even made it out the door for my road test, our fuel trims are actually the opposite of what they were before. Now it's adding back about 10% at an idle, and this is after I clean the mass airflow sensor, remember. We were still getting a negative reading on the fuel trims after I cleaned the mass airflow sensor, so that could have been a contributing factor actually, and that could have caused our incorrect fuel alcohol composition. I have seen that. I have seen a dirty mass airflow sensor or a loose duct or something like that. I've seen a mass airflow sensor with a wrong reading cause incorrect fuel composition. So like I said, I'm going to drive it. I'm going to verify that we still have no fault. And if there is no further problem with fuel trim, I'm going to call this one fixed, and I'm going to have to ask the customer, hey, did you take it somewhere else first? Has Junior been messing around under the hood? Has there been some sort of battery disconnect? Has something been done to this truck that would cause our incorrect fuel composition reading? Okay, well, I took a drive. I was monitoring my fuel trim data, and I noticed that the fuel trims are okay at idle, but when I start to accelerate and I'm loading up the engine, I'm opening up that throttle plate, the fuel trims start to go, they trend positive, about 20% plus. And then what I've noticed was my calculated airflow and my actual airflow sensor value were not matching up. So I did a graph of that, and as you can see here, of course it doesn't want to pick this screen up. So what you're seeing here was I was graphing calculated airflow versus actual airflow. And as you can see, under a load, when we're measuring more and more air, our calculated is always reading higher than the actual mass airflow. And then when I drop back down to close throttle and idle speed, it does again read accurately. I've already checked for any vacuum or air leaks, so this right here suggests a faulty mass airflow sensor. It suggests that the mass airflow sensor may have been damaged by the dirt contamination, or it could suggest a MAP sensor, map or barrel correlation problem. But like I said earlier, when I was looking at the MAP sensor, it was reading 100 kilopascals key on, engine off, and that is a good value. So I am honestly suspecting a faulty mass airflow sensor. What would I do to confirm that? I could disconnect the mass airflow sensor on my drive back to the shop and see if my fuel trim data is then remaining within normal ranges, and that would just kind of further prove that that mass airflow sensor is reading inaccurately at higher airflow rates. Even just sitting here in an idle now, the mass airflow sensor is reading about 1 gram per second lower than calculated. And as you can see, the fuel trims at idle have now crept up to about 10 or 15% positive. Still within kind of that normal range, but a little bit excessive. It does make sense though, because the airflow reading is low, so therefore the fuel calculation would be low. And what you're seeing here is it's adding back that fuel that it missed up front. Look at that. I just disconnected that mass airflow sensor, and it's already going the opposite direction now. So it really does suggest that the mass airflow sensor is reading inaccurately. Like I said, I did check for air leaks and vacuum leaks, so what else is going to cause it to read low other than a faulty sensor? And it's more, it's working okay at an idle. It's not so bad, but it's way off. It's at least 20 grams per second lower than calculated under a load. And as you can see, with the mass airflow sensor disabled, now our fuel trims are actually settling out to be within the normal range. So I'm going to drive it back with the mass airflow sensor disabled. If the fuel trims are now normal under a load, you could almost guarantee it's a faulty sensor. Well, on the way back, with the mass airflow sensor disabled, the fuel trims were perfect. Under load at idle, we had no more than 10% either direction. It was really good looking, so I really am thinking that we have a bad mass airflow sensor. So why didn't the values change earlier when I disconnected it? Because I did that before resetting the fuel composition, and now I've done that after. So what I honestly think is going on with this vehicle is that the mass airflow sensor has been reading inaccurately under a load for long enough to cause the fuel trims to be out of whack, and therefore our fuel composition measurement to be out of whack. And then from there, it just gets worse and worse and worse, because the computer thinks it has 77% alcohol content when it really doesn't. Like I said, I really do not suspect that we have excessive alcohol content, because if we did, fuel trims would be sky high all the time. Okay, I'm gonna go look into mass airflow sensor replacement. Maybe before I do that, I'll take a little measurement of what is the mass airflow sensor reading hot idle. We'll get a before and after. I went and reconnected that sensor, so it looks like hot idle, we've got about 4.25 grams per second and about 2,575 hertz. Hertz is going to be a little more accurate of a value. This is before replacing the suspect mass airflow sensor. I could even look up some known good values on the mass airflow sensor hertz Or maybe if I had a comparable vehicle in the shop, I could quickly just take a comparison. New mass airflow sensor did not visually see anything wrong with the old one other than a little bit of a darker color on the sensing wires. Now I just got to go drive it and make sure that we're all good. Well, I replaced the mass airflow sensor and then I took a nice long drive while I was monitoring the data. Already calculated versus actual is much closer than it was. At hot idle, we had about 24, maybe 2,500 hertz before. Now it's at 2,800. I'm sitting here in park, so neutral. Under a load and during cruising and idling and all that, fuel trims are now good. So I think that's all I've got for this one. This one ended up kind of highlighting the long-term effects of letting a fault go. With that mass airflow sensor reading incorrectly for so long, we ended up with a incorrect fuel alcohol composition, and that just made it worse from there. So, like I said, I think this is all I've got for this one. Just show you that fuel trim real quick. See that at idle, we're just perfect. During my road test under load, I never saw 10% either direction. It was more like 5. So fuel trims are perfect. That's all I got.